At a 1-year-old's birthday party, she stood up and announced my dead husband had left her half of my house. Then she looked at me and said I was heartless for refusing to give her the money for the baby. What she didn't know was that I had the real will locked in my safe, medical records proving he couldn't have fathered that child, and bank statements showing exactly why she needed my home. By October, her forged document was entered into probate court. 2 weeks later, the judge referred it to the district attorney as a criminal matter. The clerk stamped it into public record at 9:42 a.m. By the end of the year, she wasn't negotiating inheritance anymore. She was hiring a defense attorney. My name is Laurel Bennett, and this is how a family betrayal turned into a felony. Chapter 1. The Toast That Burned Everything Down. 3 months after I buried my husband, my best friend stood up at her baby's first birthday party and announced that her son was my dead husband's child, and that under his will, she was entitled to half of my house. If what she was holding was real, I could lose everything Daniel and I built. My name is Laurel Bennett. I am 38 years old, and I work as a senior fraud analyst for a health insurance company in Nashville. I read claims for a living. I study signatures, notarizations, timestamps, and paper trails. I decide whether a document is legitimate or a lie dressed up as something official. That afternoon in Franklin, Tennessee, I was not the analyst. I was the widow everyone expected to fall apart. My husband, Daniel Bennett, died in March of 2024. He was 42, a regional sales director for a commercial HVAC supplier covering Middle Tennessee. He collapsed during a company softball game in Brentwood. One moment he was jogging toward second base, the next he was on the ground. Cardiac arrest. No warning. The funeral filled every pew at our church. Coworkers in pressed shirts, neighbors who borrowed his tools, friends from our small group. For weeks afterward, people brought casseroles and sympathy cards. By June, the house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum at night. Claire Holloway had been part of my life since 2009. We met at a marketing conference in Atlanta and stayed friends through job changes and moves. She stood beside me at my wedding in 2012. She sat next to me in a hospital room in 2021 when I lost our pregnancy. When she gave birth to her son, Owen, in June of 2023, I was one of the first people she called. She told everyone the father was a man she met online who disappeared. No details, no drama. We believed her. Daniel helped her assemble a crib. I dropped off groceries. I never questioned it. So when she invited me to Owen's first birthday party in June of 2024, I went. Her backyard in Franklin was strung with blue and white balloons. There was a folding table of cupcakes and about 30 people standing in clusters with paper plates. Most of them knew Daniel. About half an hour in, Claire tapped a butter knife at her champagne glass. The sound cut through the chatter. Conversations faded. She smiled in a way that looked practiced. She said she had been carrying a secret for over a year. She said it was time to tell the truth. Then she said she and Daniel had been having an affair. She did not whisper it. She let the word sit there. She said it started as emotional support, that grief over my miscarriage brought them closer, that late-night texts turned physical. She said Owen was Daniel's son. She said Daniel had updated his estate plan to make sure Owen would receive his rightful inheritance. Rightful inheritance. She reached into a beige envelope and pulled out stapled pages. She said it was a notarized will. She said Daniel left her half of my house on Sycamore Ridge and his 2022 Toyota Highlander. She spoke calmly, as if this were a business arrangement. Someone near the table muttered, "Oh my God." A woman from church leaned toward me and said, "Think about the baby, Laurel." There it was, the moral framing, the suggestion that I was standing between a child and what he deserved. I felt the weight of every stare. I looked at the document in Claire's hand. I noticed the notary seal at the bottom. I noticed she notably held it. I noticed she avoided my eyes. I also noticed something she did not know mattered. I looked at her, then at Owen, who was smearing frosting across his high-chair tray and laughing, and I said, "I see." That was all. No denial, no accusation, no tears. For a second, something flickered across Claire's face. She had expected anger. A breakdown would have helped her. Instead, she got quiet. The party resumed in low, even conversations. A few people approached me with tight smiles. Claire moved through the yard accepting sympathetic nods. I stayed 10 minutes longer, long enough to kiss Owen's frosting-covered cheek, long enough to tell Claire we would talk soon. The drive back to the house in Franklin took less than 20 minutes. I kept my hand steady on the wheel. My phone vibrated twice before I reached the main intersection. I did not check it until I pulled into the driveway. The first text read, "I do not want to take sides, but maybe you should consider settling for the child's sake." The second said, "We are praying for you. There is an innocent baby involved." In an hour, the story had shifted. I was no longer the widow who lost her husband. I was the woman blocking a child's inheritance. I stepped into the house Daniel and I bought in 2018 for $470,000, with a down payment my grandmother scraped together over decades. If that document was real, half of it could be stripped away in probate court. Claire believed she had cornered a grieving widow with a notarized will and a sympathetic audience. She believed shock would keep me from asking questions. She believed invoking estate law would scare me into compliance. What she did not know was that 3 years earlier, Daniel made a medical decision that made her entire story biologically impossible. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and stood in the quiet kitchen. Claire believed she had trapped a widow. What she had actually done was hand a fraud analyst a crime scene. Chapter 2: The Safe and the Felony. 2 days later, Claire texted me as if we were discussing a closing date instead of the wreckage of my marriage. "We need to sit down and go over the property transfer timeline. I want to keep this civil." Civil. I stared at the message while standing in the produce aisle at the grocery store in New Canaan. People compared avocados and argued over cereal brands. My best friend was calmly mapping out how to divide my home under a will I knew could not be real. I did not respond. That night, after the house fell quiet, I walked into our bedroom and slid open the closet door. On the top shelf behind folded blankets sat a small, fireproof safe. Mark bought it in late 2022 after a colleague's family spent months fighting an inheritance dispute in probate court. "Better to have everything documented," he had said. I entered the code and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 folders. The first held Mark's will, signed in November 2022 at a law firm in Westport called Bennett & Shaw. We had reviewed it together at our kitchen table. If anything happened to him, I was the sole beneficiary of the estate. The house in New Canaan, his retirement accounts, the life insurance policy. Everything transferred to me without condition. There was no secondary heir, no provision for a child outside our marriage. The second folder contained medical records from August 2020. Mark had undergone a vasectomy at a urology clinic in Stamford. I drove him there. I waited in the parking lot, scrolling through emails. 6 weeks later, the lab report came back definitive. No sperm detected. I ran my finger over the date, October 2020. Biology does not negotiate. The third item was a single folded sheet of paper in Mark's handwriting, dated December 2022. Before I unfolded it, I already felt the weight of what it might say. "Laurel, if anything ever feels off with Claire, trust your instincts." He wrote that she had started texting him late at night, that she lingered too long after dinners, that he told her clearly nothing inappropriate was going to happen. He did not want to create drama in our friend group, but he wanted me to know. Reading those words felt like being cut twice, once by her accusation, once by the realization that she had been circling our marriage long before he died. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "We can do this privately. There is no need to make it messy." Messy. She had stood in her backyard and accused my dead husband of an affair. She had invoked a notarized will and inheritance claim in front of 30 people. Now she wanted discretion? I locked the safe and stood up. The next morning, I called a probate attorney recommended by a colleague. Her name was Rebecca Klein. She had practiced estate litigation in Fairfield County for over 20 years. Her office overlooked the train tracks in Westport. Certificates lined the wall behind her desk. She listened carefully as I described the birthday party, the accusation, the will Claire displayed. "Do you have a copy of the document she showed?" Rebecca asked. "No, only photos people posted before things went quiet." "And your husband's actual will?" I handed her the folder. She read quickly. "If the document she displayed differs from this one, and she files it with the probate court as a valid will, we are no longer talking about gossip," she said. "We are talking about potential estate fraud." She held my gaze. "In Connecticut, knowingly submitting a forged testamentary document can qualify as a Class C felony. That carries real criminal exposure. In serious cases, prison time." "So if she keeps talking about it in backyards and over text messages, it is ugly but not necessarily criminal," I said. "Correct. If she files it with the court, it becomes a formal inheritance dispute. If we prove forgery or false statements under oath, it can escalate to criminal charges, perjury, fraud." I imagined a probate judge reviewing paperwork. I imagined losing half of my house because a forged will slipped through uncontested. If that document were accepted, I could lose the equity Mark and I built over 10 years, the mortgage I was still paying, the security I depended on. Rebecca quoted a retainer of $7,500. I transferred it from the high-yield savings account I opened in 2016, $300 a month, every month. I had always believed financial discipline was self-defense. Now it was survival. As I signed the engagement letter, Rebecca said something that stayed with me. "Sometimes the strongest move is letting the other party commit to their lie." "You mean wait?" I said. "I mean allow her to decide how far she wants to take it." On the drive home, I replayed Claire's speech in my head. The practiced tone, the moral framing. Think about the baby. She had not just accused Mark of betrayal, she had positioned me as the villain if I resisted. That was the sharpest betrayal, not the affair she invented, the calculation behind it. Widow versus child, grief versus innocence. For 2 weeks, I said nothing publicly. I went to work, I reviewed claim files, I let whispers circulate. Claire texted twice more, asking when we would finalize the asset transfer. I did not answer. Then, in mid-July, a certified envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address read, Fairfield County Probate Court. My pulse slowed. I opened it at the kitchen counter. The notice stated that a document purporting to be the last will and testament of Mark Bennett had been submitted for probate. A hearing would be scheduled. She had filed it. I called Rebecca immediately. "She went through with it," I said. "Then we move forward," she replied. Move forward meant certified copies of medical records. It meant preserving the original will. It meant preparing to challenge a forged document in open court. Claire thought filing that will would intimidate me. What she had actually done was create a paper trail. And paper trails are how crimes get proven. Chapter 3. The Social War. By the following week, the rumor had outrun the truth. Grief had already made me fragile in other people's eyes. Now, scandal made me suspect. The first fracture came from Mark's mother. Her name was Eleanor Bennett. She was 68, a retired school counselor living in Greenville, South Carolina. When her name lit up on my phone that Sunday afternoon, I stepped outside onto the back porch before answering. "Laurel," she began, her voice tight, "I need you to be honest with me." "I have been," I said. "Claire showed me documents. She says there is a will. She says the baby might be Mark's." "Might be?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "He is not," I said, "and the will she showed is not valid." "How can you be so sure?" Eleanor asked. "I thought I knew my son." The sentence hit harder than the accusation at the birthday party. If she convinced his own mother, she could convince anyone. "I am sure because I have proof," I said carefully. "I cannot share everything yet, but I promise you, Mark did not live a double life." I spoke to an attorney here, she continued. He mentioned grandparents sometimes have visitation rights if there is a child involved. If that baby is Mark's, I cannot turn my back on him. The statute she referenced allowed limited petitions under certain circumstances. Claire had clearly done her homework. This is not about visitation, I said quietly. It is about a forged document and a false inheritance claim. I do not want to fight you, Eleanor said. I just do not want to lose my son twice. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch long after the screen door clicked shut. Claire had not only attacked my marriage, she had reached into a mother's grief and weaponized it. At the office in Raleigh the following Monday, the atmosphere felt altered. Normally, conversations revolved around deductibles and deadlines. That day, when I stepped into the break room, the chatter softened. Denise, from underwriting, approached me. Is there any truth to what people are saying? She asked. What exactly are they saying? That there's a probate case, that someone filed a will challenging your estate. It is being handled, I said. That is all I can say. By Tuesday, the homeowners association in our subdivision had taken notice. After the monthly meeting, one neighbor caught up with me in the parking lot. We are very sorry for your loss, he began, but if there is a child involved, maybe compromise would avoid a long inheritance dispute. Compromise what, exactly? I asked. Maybe sharing some equity. For the boy. For the boy. Widow versus child. Compassion versus greed. The narrative was settling into place. The only person who did not hesitate was my younger sister, Emily Carter. She drove up from Chapel Hill and met me at a diner off the interstate. This is insane, she said after I explained everything. Mark would never have done this. I know. Then why is she so confident? Because she thinks sympathy will outweigh evidence, I said. I told Emily about the vasectomy, about the lab report, about the letter Mark left warning me that Claire had crossed lines before he died. Then biologically it cannot be his child, she said. Correct. So who is the father? That question lingered. 2 days later, my friend Erin called. I've been thinking about something, she said. Back in fall 2021, I used to see a white pickup outside Claire's townhouse late at night, blue logo on the side, construction company. Do you remember the name? I think it was Hargrove Builders. That was the same period Mark had been traveling constantly for work. I pulled his archived emails and expense reports from September 2021. Hotel confirmations in Savannah and Charleston, conference registrations. He was not even in North Carolina during the likely conception window. Biology had excluded him. Now his schedule did too. I called our attorney, Rebecca Klein, and relayed what Erin remembered. Within hours, Rebecca's office located a Daniel Hargrove, 44, owner of Hargrove Custom Homes in Wilmington, married, 3 children. We drafted a formal letter requesting voluntary paternity testing in connection with the pending probate matter and potential estate fraud. The response came 2 days later through his attorney. Mr. Hargrove denies any relation and declines testing. Of course he did. Secrets resist exposure. Less than a week later, Rebecca called again. His wife contacted their attorney this morning, she said. She found old messages between him and Claire. He's agreed to testing. The social war was no longer just mine. Eleanor called that evening. I heard something about a test, she said carefully. Yes. If it proves the baby isn't Mark's, what happens then? Then the inheritance claim collapses, I said, and the probate hearing becomes something very different. There was a pause. I should have trusted you, she whispered. The test was scheduled for Monday morning. If the results confirmed what I already knew, the sympathy that protected Claire would evaporate overnight. She would not only lose an argument, she would lose the story she built her survival on. Chapter 4. The Collapse. The results came in on a gray Thursday morning in early September. Rebecca called before 9. We have the report, she said. I was standing at the kitchen counter in our house in Cary, staring at the hardwood floor as if it might shift under me. Go ahead, I said. Daniel Mercer is the biological father of the child. The words were clinical and final. Not Mark, not my husband. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. I had known it already. The vasectomy records, the lab confirmation, the timeline. Still, hearing it out loud felt like someone restoring oxygen to a room that had been sealed for months. "Thank you," I said quietly. When I hung up, I sat down at the table Mark and I chose together in 2018, the same year we signed the mortgage papers for this house. If Claire's forged will had been accepted, half of this home could have been stripped away in probate, half of the equity, the security I depended on reduced to a legal bargaining chip. The DNA result did more than expose a lie. It protected my life. Within 10 days, Daniel Mercer's world began to fracture. His wife, Allison, filed for divorce in Wake County. They had 3 children. Based on his income from Mercer Custom Homes, his preliminary child support obligation for the 4th child could approach $1,800 a month once insurance and custody were calculated. News traveled quickly through their church community. A contractor who once worked with Mark sent me a brief message. "I heard about the test. I am sorry she dragged you into that." Dragged was the right word. 2 days after the DNA confirmation, my phone lit up with Claire's name. "We can still settle this quietly," she wrote. "There is no need to destroy multiple families over misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. She had accused my dead husband of adultery. She had filed a forged will in probate court claiming inheritance rights. She had tried to take half my home under the guise of protecting a child. That was not a misunderstanding. I forwarded the message to Rebecca. "She is nervous," Rebecca said when she called me back. "Without paternity, the emotional weight behind her inheritance claim evaporates." Emotional weight had been Claire's shield, a grieving widow versus a single mother with a baby. That contrast had done most of the work for her. Now it was gone. Rebecca intensified preparation for the October probate hearing. I met her in Westport with a box of documents, each page labeled. We spread everything across the conference table. Mark's valid will from November 2022, properly executed and witnessed. Medical records from the Stamford Clinic confirming the vasectomy in August 2020 and 0 sperm count in October. The sworn affidavit from Angela Cho, the notary whose commission had been copied without authorization. She confirmed she had never notarized any document for Mark Bennett. Then, Rebecca placed 2 pages side by side. On the alleged will Claire filed, the signature date was January 2022. Next to it sat a birthday card from May 2022, signed by Mark to a colleague. The same exaggerated curve on the M, the same heavy downward stroke on the B. She copied his signature from a later document, Rebecca said, which means the will could not have been signed on the date it claims. The timeline contradicts itself. "We will present this clearly at the hearing," Rebecca continued. "Combined with the DNA result and the affidavit, it establishes a pattern of estate fraud." Pattern. That word steadied me. That evening, my phone rang again. Eleanor. "I saw the report," she said softly. "Yes." "He did not betray you." "No, he did not." There was a pause. "I am sorry I doubted him. And you." I swallowed. "I grieved him twice," I said. "Once at his funeral, and once when she tried to rewrite who he was." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Now we go to court," I said, "and the truth becomes part of the record." The next morning, Daniel Mercer called. "Laurel," he began, his voice strained, "I never meant for it to spiral." "You mean you never meant for it to become public?" I replied. He exhaled. "Claire told me she would handle it. I did not know she filed that will. You did not question why she was claiming half my house. I thought it was about support. Support does not require a forged signature." "My wife has filed for divorce," he said. My kids are confused. Everything is collapsing. Consequences rarely ask permission before arriving, I said. By late September, Rebecca confirmed our formal objection was complete. It outlined the valid will, the medical evidence excluding paternity, the sworn notary affidavit, and the chronological impossibility of the alleged signature. Once this is filed, Rebecca said, the judge will have little room for ambiguity. And Claire? I asked. If the court determines the document was knowingly falsified, it can refer the matter to the state attorney. That moves beyond probate. The hearing was set for the second week of October. Every document was indexed, every inconsistency highlighted, every fact aligned. For the first time, she would have to answer questions under oath. In a few weeks, Claire's story would stand before a judge, and this time, sympathy would not be enough. Chapter 5. The Hearing and the Record. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and bright. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps in downtown Raleigh in early October, watching people move in and out of the building as if this were an ordinary day. For most of them, it was. For me, it was the day a lie would either survive or collapse. Rebecca stood beside me, calm as always. "This is procedural," she said. "The judge has reviewed the file. We are confirming what the record already shows." Inside, the probate courtroom felt smaller than I expected. No jury box, no dramatic gallery. Just a judge, 2 tables, and a clerk ready to document every word. Claire sat across from me with her attorney. No birthday decorations, no sympathetic audience, no baby in her arms. Just paperwork. When the judge entered, we rose. The matter concerned the validity of a will filed earlier that summer. The judge confirmed she had reviewed the submitted evidence in advance, including the objection and supporting documentation. Rebecca began with precision. "Your Honor, we request confirmation of the decedent's valid will dated November 2022 and dismissal of the subsequently filed document dated January 2022 on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation." She presented the evidence in sequence. The authentic will from November, properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Medical records from the Charlotte Urology Clinic confirming a vasectomy in August 2020 and laboratory verification of 0 sperm count 2 months later. The sworn affidavit from Angela Cho, a commissioned notary public, stating that her official seal had been copied without authorization and that she had never notarized the contested will. Then came the timeline analysis. Rebecca placed 2 enlarged signature samples into the record. "The contested document is dated January 2022, she said. "The signature matches a birthday card written in May 2022. The distinctive formation of the initials is identical. The January signature could not have existed before the May document." The judge examined the exhibits carefully. Finally, the certified DNA report was entered. It confirmed that Daniel Mercer, not my late husband, was the biological father of the child referenced in the contested filing. The judge turned to Claire's attorney. "Do you contest the authenticity of the November will?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you dispute the notary affidavit?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you challenge the DNA findings?" "No, Your Honor." Each answer narrowed the space around her. After a pause, the judge spoke clearly. "The court finds that the document dated January 2022 is invalid and unsupported by credible evidence. The November 2022 will is affirmed as the decedent's valid testamentary instrument. Based on the inconsistencies presented and the sworn affidavit regarding the notary seal, the court refers this matter to the district attorney for review of potential criminal conduct involving a forged testamentary document." The words were measured, but they shifted everything. This was no longer a private dispute. The forged will and the attempted estate claim were now part of the public record. Claire's attorney leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Her face had gone pale. The strategy built on sympathy had collided with evidence. The hearing lasted less than an hour. Outside, Rebecca allowed herself a small nod. "The probate ruling is clear," she said. "If the district attorney determines there was knowing submission of a forged document, that can carry significant penalties under state law." Criminal referral. That phrase carried more weight than any backyard accusation ever had. Within days, a short notice summarizing the probate ruling appeared in a local legal publication. It listed the affirmation of the valid will, the invalidation of the contested document, and the referral for further investigation. It did not dramatize, it did not editorialize, it simply recorded. And records do not forget. The consequences spread quietly. A venue where Claire had once coordinated events canceled 2 contracts. A church committee removed her from a planning role. Conversations shifted from sympathy to caution. Daniel Mercer drove to Raleigh in November. He stood in my living room looking at the framed photograph of Mark on the mantel. "I am sorry," he said, "for doubting him, for doubting you." "Grief makes people vulnerable to the wrong story," I replied. She nodded slowly. "He would be proud of how you handled this." I did not answer that. Pride was not what I had been fighting for. In December, I refinanced the house. Interest rates had climbed to 6.1%, and the remaining mortgage balance stood at $278,000. Signing the new paperwork felt deliberate, controlled. No one could leverage my home against me now. At work, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. The same colleagues who once avoided eye contact now asked about upcoming audits and policy changes. The probate dispute became a cautionary tale about forged documents and the limits of emotional persuasion. I was never the villain in someone else's narrative. I was the evidence. On the last evening of the year, I stood alone in the backyard. Months earlier, this space had held raised glasses and an accusation delivered like a performance. Now it held only quiet air and steady ground. The will was affirmed, the estate dispute resolved, the forged document documented, the criminal referral entered. Closure did not arrive with applause. It arrived in stamped pages and docket numbers. If you have ever been blamed for someone else's lie, remember this. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Evidence speaks louder than outrage. And if this story meant something to you, there's another one right here.